it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Horror at the Gideon Farm. A stream of warm, stinking air flows over the now arid farmland. The grip of the fire axe is dripping with sweat. It's so hard to hold on to, the weight of it becoming more and more pronounced as the stress of the situation starts to set in. The clear night sky is starting to fill with noxious smoke. The silvering moonlight begins fading into brief glimpses behind ashen clouds. A mixture of despair and hopelessness stings into my body with a debilitating effect. A massive crash of metal and flame brings my addled mind back to the violence of the moment. Suddenly, a growing fear is fed fresh fuel as the screams of a family explode out for only mere moments. They are silenced with uncaring, monstrous efficiency. The air flowing around now carries a heavy scent of iron. And that's it. Every single night. That's how the dream goes every night since that day. It's been tortuous trying to live with myself every single minute past that point. I find myself in that horrible, bloody dream at every possible moment of sleep. I know that what I did was wrong, inhuman even, but what else could I have done? I'm just a man, nothing more than human. I know there is so much more out there than that now. Dr. Ryan says that my dreams are my way of dealing with what happened, the only way I could. My dark fantasy dreams, he calls them. He says that if I write down what I feel, what I see, then maybe it can help me understand why I dream that the way I do. A tool to deal with my guilt, he says. It never worked. I just felt worse after every session with the journal. Now they say I should try talking to the tape recorder, as if it would be better than anything else. He wants me to talk out my guilt, to somehow accept it internally, as he says. He has a degree, so he must know something about what he's talking about. Except, of course, he didn't see them that day. He can't know. Otherwise he would have just let me have the gun I asked for. Instead, I got the restraints and the meds. So here I am, sitting in this soft, dark room trying to piece together my dreams and memories of that night into something that can help the good doctor understand me. Something that can maybe help me. God, can anything help me now? Now you're here, wanting to know about that horrible day. The doc said it was okay to talk to you. I don't rightly understand why you want to know about this, but from the look in your eyes, you've seen some dark days of your own. You might have heard or seen something yourself. All right, well, we can give this a shot. I hope you get something out of this. I've told this thing to the doc so many times in the past few months, yet it still feels fresh for me each time. I can close my eyes and live the whole damn day through like a movie. It was supposed to just be a regular day. The Tuesday morning sky was cold and an ugly grey thing. This was about the middle of April, so a good rolling set of strong rains was normal. It was already a bad day for it. I was going down to install a security system for a family in Gideon, Louisiana. I hated working on rainy days. The drive out of Bossier should have been about 4 hours. Well, it rained nearly the whole way there, almost as if it was taunting me. I got a flat about 2 hours into the trip. I was able to get it changed with my spare, but it took me some time. I ended up running a few hours behind, though. Eventually, I made my way to the client's house. I was more than thankful to be at the destination, but wished the rain would die out. Well, at the least, it was only down to a small, light trickle. Looking for the house was, thankfully, not difficult. The client ran a small, quiet farm, quite apart from anything else nearby. I could make out what appeared to be the main house as I cleared a section of rather winding road. There were 2 barns to each side of the house, with signs clearly leading the way in. When I pulled into the driveway of the house, I was greeted by a thin man dressed every bit the farmer part. As he made his way to my car, I could see him clearly. He was an older gentleman, easily in his 50s. I noticed right away that he carried a revolver or handgun of some type on him. He had it holstered, but his hand stayed close to it as well. He seemed on edge and wary about something, but I had a feeling it was not me. As I watched him, he kept looking to one of the barns about a mile behind me. I'd dealt with some over-the-top clients before. This wasn't the first time someone greeted me armed with an attitude. And yet, this man didn't put off any body language that came off as dangerous. He looked tired and anxious for sure, but nothing really spoke of violent intent towards me. I tried to put myself in his place to understand his demeanor. People that ask for a security system to be installed generally have had something bad happen, or they're expecting something bad coming their way. I'd read some of the notes that were sent to me by the company a few days prior to the job. It helped paint a sort of state of things. You see, the Ross family ran their small isolated farm in quite a ways out from the main city. It was a generation place and had been there for well over 50 years. There were no real security issues from the long run of it, but, well, recently something had changed. They had concerns about someone trying to break into their home for a few nights, as they'd find odd marks and breaks on their barn doors. For a while, they put it down to some kind of animal clawing at the doors at night. They didn't exactly live in a crime-ridden area after all, so the animal story could have been the more plausible issue. That went on for something of about 4 months or so. Yet that theory died out starkly when they woke up early in the morning hours to find someone running across the farmland. The document said they saw someone running off into the woods nearby. That was their limit, it seemed. Soon after, they contacted the company to have a security system installed on both barns and the main house. As I looked at the man, I could tell he was uneasy, like he was expecting something to happen at any moment. The gentleman approached me and firmly asked if I was the man from the security company. I nodded and greeted him with my hand outstretched for a handshake. He quickly took my arm instead and asked me to look him in the eye. I was taken aback by this for sure, but I'd run into some eccentric folks in my work before, as I said. I just agreed, and after a few seconds, he apologized to me and let go of my arm. I asked him what that was about, but he just apologized again and told me to follow him into the main house so we could talk. He was already halfway to the front door and, for whatever reason, didn't seem keen on talking outside. I grabbed 2 of my bags from the back seat and began to follow him. He held the door open for me and made a hand gesture to hurry up. Once we were inside, he closed the door and locked it. I noticed he had no less than 7 deadbolts. Well, I'd only seen that many locks on the door a few times before, and each time it was not a random inclusion. These people were not just concerned for security's sake. They were actually scared of someone. As I put my bags on the floor, I nodded to the door, asking if they had something happen recently. Well, the gentleman had a sour look on his face. He simply nodded and motioned for me to sit in their kitchen. As we sat, a woman came into the kitchen, but ignored us both. She only looked out the window, facing another one of their barns on the back side of the house, before going upstairs. After a moment, and a heavy sigh, the man finally began to speak to me. It was like he was weighing the prospect of even talking with me at all. The gentleman introduced himself as Aaron Ross. He told me he was the grandfather of the 4 children that lived in the home. His wife, Sharon, was the woman I'd seen moments ago. I asked where the children were, in the spirit of conversation. He simply replied that they were upstairs in a safe place. His tone was that of someone who did not want to answer more than he needed to. I had to somehow poke at the topic he was agitated about. He looked at me with such a stone-faced stare, I thought I was about to be shot then and there. Instead, he bit his lip a bit and looked down at the tabletop. I could tell he was deciding on what he wanted to say, and exactly how he wanted to say it. Finally, he looked me in the eye again and said, "Look, I know you came to do your job, but some things have changed since we made the request for the company to send someone out." I immediately thought I knew where this was going. This was not a new occurrence to me. I'd had people cancel or back out of the installs at the last minute before. I started to say that he would not get the installed down payment back, but he cut me off. I know this sounds off, but you cannot touch those barns, he said. He continued, keep the down payments, but do not touch those doors, please. I told him it was okay. We don't intrude when told not to, so he had nothing to worry about. No, there's more to it, he said sternly. His tone and glare was so serious that it made me start to worry. It was the kind of look that made me immediately remember he was armed. His face remained in its hardened state. His eyes drove cold winds across my neck. He clasped his hands together in front of him and said, Look, guy, I don't know anything about you, and rightly the same for you about me, but I need you to listen to what I have to say and don't dare pass judgment till I'm done. He carried the words with hints of respect and earnest. I felt wrong to not at least listen to him, and so I did. Well, I wish I'd been more of a cynical jerk and just left right there. Oh, how that would have made life so much easier for me. But instead, I sat there with open ears and ruined my life forever onward as he spoke. Listen to me, he started. I'm a man of God and country. I work for my family and live honestly. I don't drink more than I should and never did any kind of wrongful drugs. Spend my time at church on Sundays like I should, without a single curse to it. I don't hit women nor steal from men. I'm not telling you any of that to make me seem like a good person, but rather to let you know that I am not a crazy nut. But heaven help me, what I need to tell you is... There was a pause in his speech as he seemed to struggle to get the next part out. The internal debate of words for him was constant. It was this honest difficulty of speech that began to really worry me. After another stressed sigh, he continued. For starters, he said, you cannot leave this place right now. I know your car is right out there, and you could just drive on back, but if you do, one of them might try to follow you. We can't have that happen. It'll be dark soon outside, and I can't risk it happening again. I'm not holding you prisoner, but if I let you try and drive out now, I might end up losing someone else. And I just can't. I can't do that. I must have worn my mixed confusion in blatant display as he looked at me with a scowl. I told the man that I didn't know what he was on about. I started to tell him that, for one thing, I could leave whenever I wanted. I started bringing up the matter of the deposit once again, but he put a hand up to cut me short. He stood up and walked to the window where his wife had been looking through moments before. He made a gesture for me to follow him and look as well. Oh, I'm not trying to hurt you, mister. Far from it, he started. I know you just got here, and what I'm saying sounds wrong to you, but it is what it is. Skies have been getting darker around here, earlier and earlier every day for the past month. It was slow to notice at first, but the past 3 days it was hard to miss. Yesterday the evening dark came down around 4 p.m., and on Sunday it came down around 3 p.m. Skies should be getting dark soon here, and when it does, those barn doors are going to come open a bit more. I shut them tight with chains, but that's not enough. Sometimes one of them gets out, and you don't want to be out there if they do. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Right about this time, I was thinking the same thing. How crazy is this old man? I was every bit poised to be a mouthy jerk to the man. I was making my plans to leave and make sure to put distance between myself and that old damn fool. But then I looked out the window. As I did, my bravado died away and was replaced by something else. Fear is what it was. Funny thing, I didn't know it then. See, I'd never felt that tinge of fear before. It was a primal thing. Somehow, even though I had no idea what I was looking at, my body did. Have you ever felt primal fear? It's like every cell in your body knows that what you see or smell is dangerous. No, not just dangerous, but outright wrong. Well, as for what I saw, it was just the barn as he was showing me. I could make out the heavy chains covering the front of the barn, and even what looked like massive bits of scrap metal covering other openings near the top. Now, you have to remember that this barn was not right next door. It had an easy mile between the house, and yet, through that distance, I could see something. The doors were chained, like I said, but you could see that they had a look of wear and pressure to them, almost as if they were holding back water like a dam. The reason for the fear I felt didn't come from the chains or the stress on the doors. No, it came from the very direct feeling that, as I looked at the barn, something inside was looking back at me. I could have sworn that, as I stared at it, a shifting, bulking form moved inside. I knew there was no way I could have seen anything, not at that distance and not behind the doors, and yet I did. I stepped back from the window and stumbled a bit. The older gentleman caught me and balanced me. The look in his eyes spoke to me. He saw that I had seen something. He looked like he was sorry for it, for the experience as a whole. He sat me back down at the table and began to speak again. "We tried to cancel the install," he said. He explained that they'd tried to call out, but as of the past week, they'd had no phone service. He said that they had a satellite internet service as well, but that was out of commission too. "We tried to get help and to warn people," he explained. I asked him what had happened. He stood next to the window and stared out to the darkening sky. "Last Thursday night is when they cut us off," he started. "First, our phone line went out sometime around the evening. My son Marcus went out to check it out and never came back to the house. We, of course, got worried when he was out for 30 minutes without a word. His wife, Hannah, went out to check and, just the same, never came back in. You can't see it from here, but in the back, we had a small dish set up for satellite internet. We found it with holes ripped in it and trashed all over the yard. Well, we have cell phones too, but the signal out here is shot, always has been. We have to drive out a few miles to get a solid, usable reception. We had another man that lived here too, a farmhand that my son brought on as a favor to a friend. He went for help, took one of the cell phones with him. His car made it just a few feet before something took him." The old man started to rub his forearms in a nervous manner about this time. The memory of what he was relating to me was obviously bothering him more and more. He walked back to the table and rested his hands on the chair as he continued. "Look, I know how this sounds, but it's the truth," he said. "Something was out there in the dark. It rushed his car and tore the doors right off. We barely saw it coming. It took him and ran him straight to the southern barn. He screamed the whole way. When he got to the barn, well, that was something else. It's a sound no one should ever have to hear. Like some kind of broken glass scraping against your insides. God, it made me sick to my stomach. It was a sound that made you somehow know that God had nothing for you here. I don't even have the proper words for how it went. Somewhere under all the godless noise was the screaming of that poor boy." The old man took a moment to compose himself. It was like, just by telling me about the incident, he was living it over again for the first time. Much like my own dreams now. Yes, I get it now. This kind of stuff never leaves you, ever. That's what the doc doesn't understand, you see. There is no escape from memories like this. Now, that's not where the story ends. I wish it was, though. As the old man stood back up, he walked over to the window again to keep his watchful eye on the barn doors. He gripped his hands and crossed them across his chest before continuing. "We stayed up the whole night with the kids," he said. "Whatever was out there, we were trying to get ready for it to break down the door. Eventually, morning came and we were still all in one piece. I stepped out with my gun to check things out. I found that the car was totaled. The engine looked like it had been hammered flat somehow. Whatever hit it was big. I checked the truck that was parked on the other side of the house. I found half of it in pieces. The other half, I don't know. That Friday we understood we're not going to get anywhere fast. As I said, the night was coming quicker and quicker. With that, as the clouds darkened, we heard more and more noise from the south barn. We knew time was running short. We got the kids upstairs and started to build up our bedroom as a makeshift safe room. Well, we could hear something crashing around as it moved about in the dark of the barn to the south side. I didn't even try to go check it out. We got upstairs as soon as the sun cleared the sky. We took turns staying awake, but honestly, no one got to sleep that night. We all stayed quiet as the sounds of the barn doors being slammed open rang out. Every now and then, more of that gut-killing noise could be heard. At times we were clenching our teeth as it passed over and through us. At one point we heard scratching at the walls with knifing whispers of words we could not understand. The younger kids cried themselves to sleep. My wife did too. Daybreak came again, and the collection of noises ended. That following Saturday, I made another round of checks outside. This time I found random spots of land dug up by the southern barn. Odd symbols and a collection of toxic smells peppered the way to the barn. At the entrance of the barn, there was a bone sticking straight up out of the dirt. It looked human. Hanging from it was a small, nailed bit of wood with more of the strange marks on it. Well, it looked like some kind of weird signpost. I almost lost it there, but I braved a bit more and came up to the barn. I felt something inside watching me, and damn if I can say, I think it even smiled at me. At this point, what the old man was saying to me made a lot of sense. Crazy sense. I remember looking at the barn even from outside the house. I could feel something rotten looking back at me, and I do really mean feel. I think it was at this point that I really started to buy some of what he was spinning my way. Just maybe, I thought, just maybe there is something out there. Hell, I'd find out soon just what was out there. Lord, I wish I hadn't. The old farmer looked at me and told me how he ran back to his house to gather materials. He took anything he could from the house and then went over to the other barn to check it out. Seemingly, that barn was for the most part empty. Unfortunately, it was not entirely so. The man sat down with me at the table and went on with his story. I gathered all the nails, tape and tools I could carry in the backpack. He said, I was determined to bar those doors from opening again. I had welder's gear in the other barn. I was hoping it was clear there. When I went to the eastern barn, it was wide open. The left door was smashed in while the right one hung loose on its railing. Something had broken its way inside of this one. I looked over the barn with an encroaching fear. I felt that at any moment the darkness would reach out and shred me. I was nearly done gathering more materials from the barn when I found him, or part of him. My son. His arm was a tattered mess of gore, yet I knew it was his. He went and got a dumb tattoo of a cartoon whale when he was 15. There it was on the ground, covered in blood, dirt, and some kind of black inky grime. It was that stupid red cartoon whale smiling up at me. Right about that moment, the old man seemed to break down a bit. It was like some of the mental scaffolding that was holding his mind together crashed down. To his merit, he seemed to shake back quickly as he continued with his tale. I wanted to do more for my boy, but I pushed on and gathered what I could. He went on. I took everything and made my way to the southern barn. I spent time welding joints solid, pulling chains tight across the doors. I even tried to push some scrap metal against them. For the opening above, I did my best to cover it with garbage and stones. I dared not step foot inside, but I did what my courage would allow. Even then, during the brighter points of the day, I could feel the rot of whatever was inside the barn. Oh, it smelled horrible as well, like death and darkness. Then there was the oily velvet substance that seemed to bleed out of the wood and dirt itself. I could swear that every now and then, that stuff would reach out for me like plants moving towards sunlight. I was so tired. Maybe I was seeing stuff, but then again, I was seeing all sorts of things already. After that was done, I went back to the house and we waited for nightfall. It came quick. We listened as the chains rattled and shook all night, damn near. More of that awful noise crashed over us, and for longer than before. We were sure that something broke through the doors at some point, as we heard wood shatter. We only hoped that whatever it was not on the way to the house. Somehow we made it another night. Sure enough, as I went out to check things the next morning, I saw a small hole blown through the barn door. The chains held, but something still punched through. I knew it wouldn't hold much longer for us. Now there was even more of that inky black substance on the barn. The base was damn near covered in it. I think it's growing more and more each day. On Sunday morning, one of the older kids came down with me to help. Nate, a good boy, just turned 15 a few months ago. He wanted to do something to calm himself. Thought it was a good idea at the time. I was so tired. It was a mistake. Nate helped me with the checks around the house, and all things considered, it went well for the day. We reinforced the house as best we could with the tools that I gathered. As night came rolling in early, we started our trek back upstairs, like we did the days before, to get ready for the darkness. As we did, Nate shouted something about his mom. I don't know what he saw, but he took off into the yard. He was yelling something, but I could not rightly hear him. Tried to stop him. Almost had him for a moment, but he wrestled out of my grip before I could pin him down. In a few moments, he was running on down the road that you drove up on. My body felt ice cold all over as I watched something dart out from the direction of the southern barn. It wasn't quite dark yet, but it was gliding along the shadowed edges. I turned back to the road, to Nate. He was a ways down, and I heard him scream. He was calling out for his mama. I wanted to run down after him, but the sun was setting and I couldn't leave the other alone. Hell, I was scared. So scared. I got up a bit of hope, though, as I saw him running back down the road. I thought he might make it. He was close. Damn, hope is such a cruel thing to have in the dark. As he got about 10 feet from the door, the thing from the barn that had been waiting shook out like a thunderbolt. Couldn't rightly make it out. Looked like it was made from the same oily muck that was crawling up the side of the barn. Well, it had shape, but not really. It's hard to describe rightly. Like I was not really seeing something even though it was there. It was there, though. I know because it got him. It sprayed some kind of blackness all over Nate. Like squid tentacles all over him. Oh, the boy screamed and cried as that thing dragged him back into the barn through the hole. A hole that was definitely not as big as the boy was to fit through. Oh, the sounds of that ordeal were monstrous. The screams went out after that. Didn't hear any noise that night save for some light scratches at the door downstairs. That was one of the worst nights yet. The other kids hadn't said a word, not even cried that night. We all just missed Nate. The old man moved back to the table and looked right at me again. He asked, "You want to know why I checked your eyes when you got here?" I gave him a simple nod. I was still trying to process everything he was telling me. Words were not doing my mind state any justice at the time. He sat down and told me about the man that came on Monday. "There was a fella came round here yesterday," he said. Saw him walk up to the house as I was checking for damage to the outside. No idea where he came from, just walked up out of the blue. He said he was looking for his lost dog. I'd never seen him around, and I know I'd not heard or seen a dog recently either. I immediately asked him if he drove here, as I was looking for a clear way out of the area. I knew we would never make it on foot before dark. He just ignored the question and stared at me. Now, the man was dressed nice. Not church nice, just nice. He looked for all intents like a normal man. I kept trying to ask him about how he got out here to us and if he'd seen anyone else, and yet he just kept asking me the same damn question over and over. Had we seen his dog? I eventually asked him if he was alright, and he started to bark at me. I mean, he literally started barking like a dog at me. As he did, the shape of his eyes began to change into this muddy black ink, much like the barn had on it. In just a few seconds, his eyes essentially dripped off his face into a puddle of black on the floor. Oh, just think of a woman with runny mascara on her face. Just imagine that her eyes were also running off of her as well. In a few moments, there was this eyeless, barking man just standing there. Even without eyes, though, he was still staring at me. Oh, it was something else to see. Without thinking, I pulled my gun and shot him twice. It, just kept on barking. After a few moments of that horror show, he just took off walking towards the chained barn. I tried to keep track on him, but he was gone out of sight quickly. Strange enough, that night we had little to nothing in the way of noise coming from the barn either. No scratching noises or whispers on the house. Around 1 a.m, we thought maybe whatever devilry was going on might have passed on. However, at 4 a.m, we hear a wailing screech coming from the land all around us. It was something different than the last few nights. Sounded like it was almost human in tone, but hell, if anything human could actually do that. That went on for an hour, and then nothing. As the sun rose, I did my check around the house again. As best as I could tell, nothing had touched the house. Everything seemed to be outside for the most part, until I saw the back door. It was dripping with that black stuff all around. I think it's getting closer. What really bothered me about that day was the barking man. No doubt it came from the barn. It was out in the daylight. Whatever was inside the barn was getting bolder or stronger. Maybe both. Either way, I knew that somehow we were running out of time. Now, at this point in the story, you may be asking yourself why I didn't just get back in my car and leave. I wanted to. Even if I didn't believe the man through and through, I was plenty creeped out. I was bordering on terrified even, to be honest. The thing is, though, the man was not lying about it getting dark early. As I looked at the old man's face, I could see he was getting stressed. A heavy banging noise was rising up from outside. I just knew then and there where it was coming from. I stood out to look at the window facing the southern barn. The chains were shaking and trembling as much as I might have been. The sun was setting unnaturally fast as an inky blackness of a night sky took shape overhead. The old man made a motion for me to follow him upstairs. I didn't think twice about it. We started our way up the stairs together. I paused for a moment, though, as I heard this awful grinding noise outside. The old man told me to keep on going up. It was my car. I knew it. Something outside was destroying it, just like the other vehicles the nights before. As we reached the bedroom, there was a flurry of work to get dressers moved, boards nailed in, and makeshift weapons readied. The door was blocked and locked. The only window in the room was covered by multiple boards and a mattress. In the middle of the room, 3 children were sitting down. 2 small boys, probably around 6 and 7, and 1 girl, maybe about 9. They all wore the same scared, spaced-out look on them. I spoke to them, tried to say some comforting things, but they barely acknowledged me. I didn't blame them. I was mostly focused on the cacophony rising up around the house. I heard it, the glass-cutting noise the old man talked about. It rolled out of the barn like a force of nature. I could feel it cutting at my senses all over. It might have only lasted for a few moments, but it felt like hours of agony. In there, somewhere with all the horrid audio trauma, was the hint of speech. I couldn't make out the words at all, but there was definitely someone, or something, talking. It had a deep guttural tone with an aggressive effect. I may not have understood the language, but I definitely felt the meaning in it. It carried death in those tones. Now, the next few hours are where my nightmares start. The old man was right. The thing in the barn was getting stronger, and their time in that home was coming to an end. This was to be their last night alive, and I was the reason why. What I'm going to tell you will make me out as a monster, I'm sure. Yet, what I saw that night would have broken any man and crushed any morals. We stayed in the room for about 30 minutes, listening to the noise of those chains rattle and smash against the barn. Suddenly, there was a loud snap as they shattered apart. Following that, we heard a strong shearing noise. I shared looks with the old man and his wife. We all knew it was the barn doors coming down. We listened as one came down and then the other. Another sound at the barricaded window made us jump back. It was a soft tapping, like something was just testing the strength of the glass frame. Suddenly it picked up in force and the glass shattered. I could see bits of it hit the floor where the mattress was pressed against it. Next, one of the wooden planks splintered and it hit the floor as well. The children were screaming in terror. I matched their terror, but couldn't find my own voice to scream with them. From behind the mattress, I saw the crawling form of something dark. It was the oily substance that the man had talked about. Despite nothing visible in the form of eyes, I watched it as it seemingly looked around the room and gripped the mattress. It pulled hard and tore it through the now broken window frame. The old man fired 3 shots into the night. I don't know if he was aiming at something, or if he was just firing out of fear. His wife moved to shove the headboard of the bed to the window in an attempt to bar it again. Well, she only got halfway in the task before tendrils of the black substance came back through the window. It seemed to emit some kind of screech and stabbed out at her back. I could hear her bones crack as the tendrils bore into her with maddening force. She dropped to the floor with a dead impact. She was gone, just like that. The black, crawling substance reeled back and took her body out with an ugly effect as she bent and battered against the walls. The old man was already moving the main dresser from the bedroom door. I know that he saw what I saw. I know that he witnessed the brutal death of his wife just seconds before. Yet, either out of fear, a sense of protective duty to the kids, or both, he was determined to get out of the room. I moved to help him as best I could. Soon we had the door open and we were trying to make our way downstairs. He led the 3 kids down and I followed behind them. As I left the room, I could see more of those black probing tendrils making their way into the room. I shut the door in an effort to stall their advance. They never seemed to make an attempt to go further, but even more terror-inducing than their possible advance was the sound behind the door. I swore there were voices in the room, like the inked tentacles were talking amongst themselves in that same harsh language we'd heard before. And something else, you see. To have to acknowledge that intelligence exists in these things. Imagine being hunted by a lion, but it's not just doing it for hunger. Imagine it has more in its action than base primal instinct. Just picture that the lion has a plan for you. That it had been planning your death for some purpose altogether alien to you. That feeling you get. It makes you feel small somehow. like you couldn't grasp at the horrible entirety of it all. The why of it. I would have stood there being swallowed by that feeling, if not for one of the kids. I looked back at one of the older girls who was tugging at my feet. She was practically pulling me down the stairs. I came back to my senses and ran down with the rest of them. As I came to the kitchen, at the base of the stairs, I could see the old man readying his gun. He let loose another set of shots at something behind the door. I took a glance at the window, where we were able to see the southern barn before. Now it was covered in a layer of blackness, preventing any visibility at all. I heard the man shout to head for the back door instead. I followed the kids as we made our way to the back. The door was barred, and we worked to get it open. Finally, we got it open just as the sound of the front door exploding apart was heard. As we made our way out, the old man screamed to run for the other barn. Behind us, in the house, I could hear a chittering noise mixed in with the sound of random destruction. The home was being torn apart by whatever made it inside. I risked one look back and saw that inky blackness covering most of the southern side of the home. It pulsed and heaved with a sickening pattern that seemed to move in and out of focus. It was like the old man had said before. It was like watching something that was definitely there, but at the same time, it wasn't. We made to the other barn as the old man started to pull down a ladder. I could see that he intended to try and escape whatever was coming in the night by waiting out in the second level of this old battered structure. Yet, at the moment, there was nothing else for us to do. We made our way up and pulled the ladder up with us. We all found some kind of weapon from the toolbox. Two of the younger kids were holding a wrench and screwdriver respectively. The older girl brandished a large wrench. The man aimed his gun down into the dark. I found an old fire axe near a pile of random junk. It was rusted and heavy, but I took some comfort in having a real weapon in my hands. A sudden crunching noise drew everyone to look at the house. The family watched as the tumor-like ink on their home groaned and strained. Its near-translucent darkness shifted and stretched out across the home with strings of tendrils cracking through the sides. With a seeming sense of ease, the monstrous blackness tore the home apart in a violent display. The tendrils snaked about the wreck as if searching for something. All the while, another wave of that damaging noise shot out across the night. It brought the kids to their knees. The old man did his best to stay upright and aim his gun toward the entrance. Now, at this point, I started to notice something. I could hear words in the noise this time. Not just some odd language, but real words. Well, I can't rightly say if they were English, but I did understand them. Simple things at first. I could hear something asking for a lock, a key, a sign. I didn't understand any of it at first. And then, suddenly, I was able to hear solid sentences. Somewhere in the noise, lurking in the void dark of the southern barn, something was talking to me. It asked me clearly, in direct inquiry, "Why do you hide my key?" I suddenly became aware of the old man shaking behind my back. He was asking me if I was okay. I quickly took note of the blood pouring from my ears. I felt numb all over. I could barely feel or hear anything. I rested myself against a toolbox to gain my senses. And as I did, another one of the odd screeching noises echoed from the tendrils scouring the debris of the house. A vibrant, tearing pain dulled into my left temple. I could hear more words sliding through my ears. It said to me, "Give me the keys, leave the keys, feed me the keys." I again could not at all understand what that meant. Yet, as I stood properly and tried to right myself, I could now feel a pronounced change in my composure. The numbness was mostly gone. I could even see better. I'm not sure how to explain that, but I could see through the night like it was suddenly early morning again. The newfound light hurt me at first. I couldn't tell what was happening. Mixtures of fear and confusion made for a crooked mental cocktail. I stumbled for a bit and almost took a dive off the second floor of the barn. The older of the children grabbed my arm and righted me again. I went to thank her, but as I looked at her, something was off. In her cheeks, I could see odd symbols peeking through, lightly glowing with a pale, thin light. As I looked, the symbols ran down her neck and replicated on her hands. I was transfixed on these small etchings glowing out of her body. Behind her, the other 2 children stood at the ready with their tools. It was faint at first, but soon I could see some of the same symbols shining out of their faces as well. Nowhere near as much as the eldest daughter, but they still had them as well. I think I was even starting to see something in the symbols too. Maybe not. I was brought out of my focus by another series of shots from the old man. He was shooting at something that entered the barn below. I moved over to see whatever his target was, but a massive force of heat threw me back. A white-hot flash ran across my body. I could feel my balance separating itself from gravity. Rushing pain flooded my face and back, with random bursts in other limbs. I think I might have passed out for a moment. If I did, I don't know how long. When I came to my senses again, I was laying by a ruined portion of the barn. It hurt to stand. A lot. Something was broken. Maybe a lot of somethings. My eyes tried their best to adjust again to the light. However, I soon realized that the light was coming from a new source. Fire. I was surrounded by the land ablaze. The farmland was lit up around me in a roaring inferno of greenish-white flames. The heat singed across my arms and neck with an almost chilling touch. Whatever brought about the flames so suddenly took them back almost as abruptly. I was surrounded by ruined land. Ash and smoke had replaced the fertile land that once made up the farm. I pulled my thoughts into a working motion and risked a glance from behind the now charred wall of the barn. Nearly instantly, that choice was met with a rolling disgust in my stomach. I watched as these 2 hulking nightmares took form from the absolute darkness of the land. Odd shapes and twists of the inky blackness called together, creating something horrid. One of the brutes walked forward through the black, shapelessness void. I focused in on it and really took in the grandness of the monstrosity before me. The damn thing was nearly 9 feet tall with a thick frame. It glistened in the light of the fire. It wore a visceral coat of yellowing fur upon its upper chest and arms. I couldn't discern where skin began or ended on its body. Its head was seemingly as solid as bone cylinder. It stood up on an odd set of legs, bent seemingly to the side with unnaturally twisted bones protruding outward. As it moved forward a bit more, I could see that it had a third leg as well. I had a brief image of the tripods from War of the Worlds play into my head. This thing, Martian or not, was quite definitely nothing in the realm of anything human. Its arms ended in brutal-looking claws, or something approaching a claw. The entire makeup of the abomination was nearly too much for me to take in. The entire form of the thing seemed just to be made to offend reality itself. Suddenly, the other one moved closer to the first and allowed me to get a look at it as well. The second beast was nothing if not entirely alien to the first. It bore no resemblance at all. This monster, while nearly as tall, was nothing in terms of brutality that first maintained. It carried a look of emaciation, with loose skin hanging from its somewhat skeletal body frame. It only had one arm that seemed to be damaged or broken as it hung limp. It walked, or rather shambled in a sense, on a pair of ugly, bony legs. One was as thin as the rest of the body, but the other was only so until near what I suspect its ankle would be. There the thing seemed to have massive swelling of what appeared to be pustules and muscle. I watched as the more skeletal thing raised what he considered to be its head. It looked like it was partially melted or smashed into its torso. It was more a lump of greyish flesh than any form of a head, but nested near the bottom left was what I imagined to be an eye. I felt any sense of courage drain from me. The fire axe was there, not far from me, and I made a move to grab it. However, once I had it, the fire axe seemed like a comical accessory instead of something of real defense. I dropped back to one knee behind the farmhouse wall. I considered the idea of running for it down the road. I concocted multiple other ideas that fell to ruin in my mind in the span of a few seconds. I felt the desperation and fear tearing away at my motor functions. Part of me wanted to run at full speed without looking back, while the other part of me wants to hide under a pile of broken barn wall in hopes that the beasts leave me alone. For a moment's time, I gave in to the thought and prepared to dig in. The idea of just waiting out the walking nightmares seeming more and more plausible to me. I pulled myself tight against the wall that I was hiding behind, and just then, one of those things jumped and landed near me. It was the bony thing I was moving right past. I thought it'd seen me for sure, and my life was over. But it kept moving on. It hadn't seen me, or if it had no interest in me. No, I was moving over to a bit of the barn wall laying on the ground. It reached out with its ruined stump of an arm. Some of that black substance shot out and tore the debris away. Underneath it was the old man. I thought he was dead. He looked the part with obvious burn wounds on his face. But the thing moved to pick him up. As it did, the old man aimed his gun once more at the monster. I was amazed he still had it within him. I wondered if it would have mattered. He never got the chance to fire. His hand, and soon after his entire arm, was shorn from his body with horrible ease. The thing flung the man like a plaything into the night sky. Where he landed I could only guess at. He would be dead for sure. I was frozen with fear, even more so at this point. I strained to keep myself conscious. I wanted to give up entirely and just leave the world of nightmares I had entered. Looking outward, I could see something glowing in the ashen dirt not far from me. It was a pale light, faint but definitely there. It was one of the kids. I could feel my eyes trying to focus in on them. Really, it was not my doing though. That rolling echo sound flew out across the night again. And with it came the voice. "My keys! I see my keys! Feed me the keys!" it screamed. The larger, monstrous creature moved with a newfound bizarre grace towards the growing spot I was seeing. It used one of its massive, grotesque appendages to pull out the younger children. Oh, it took off in a gallop of sorts, back to the southern barn. I couldn't tell if the child was even awake or alive. I noticed suddenly that the other lankier beast was slowly making its way to me. With its long legs, the distance was covered in mere seconds. I can't tell you just how absolutely apart from this world it was. Up close, inches from it, I couldn't even stand its presence. Every fibre of my body, every single cell was trying to deny it in any way possible. This thing was not meant for our world, not even our space. It reached out and picked me up. Oh, the touch of this monster. It's just more than unnerving. I can still feel the damn thing across my back and sides. Even now, a year later, I can still feel it. I can damn well feel it like it's here in the room with us. It made me look. It made me look around the ruins for something. Once I realized what it was doing, I tried to close my eyes. It wanted me to find the other kids. Oh, something about their glow, that pale shine of symbols across them. Well, I tried to be brave and shut my eyes for a moment. Yet, as I did, the voice came thundering across my mind once again. This time it was nothing I could understand directly, but I got the meaning as before. It was a threat. I could see the images of the beast holding me, tearing my body apart muscle by muscle. Bones being cracked and removed in sections. All of it in an instant. I could have chosen to close my eyes. I really could have. And somehow it needed me, or someone at least. I knew it then. Yet I broke under the threats. I looked and found 2 other glowing pale lights in the distance, moving away from the farm. Not long after, the brute took off, running with a guttural bellow. Something like a demented bull of sorts. The lights. Oh, they went out as soon as it caught up to them. There was a set of screams. They went out quick. I felt a rushing past me for a moment, and then there was pure black. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in the dirt. My body was caked with ash and dried blood. Somehow I managed to get up and walk. Don't know how long I was down again, but I knew it was at least daylight. I walked for a short while, or a long while. I really don't know. Eventually, I was picked up close to town and brought back to Bossier. Not long after that, I was placed in Brentwood for closer observation, and I've been here ever since. Turns out that screaming night after night in your sleep makes the doctors nervous. The drugs they give me don't do a thing. I wish they would. I really do, but every night I still see them. That family. Those kids. I can still feel that thing on my body. They won't let me kill myself. I know, I've tried. They want me to get better. Oh, talk it out. I'm telling you that nothing will ever cure this. Nothing will make it go away. I've tried to ask for answers. They don't really try. Or, well, they lie to me. I don't know which. I was told the farmhouse was a victim of a possible arson attack. Arson. What a load of crap that is. Listen. Yes, you never said why you wanted to hear this story, but I said I know that look in your eyes. You're chasing something dark, or maybe something dark is chasing you. Either way, if you want to know more, really know more, try looking up more about that farm. There has to be something there. Something they won't investigate, or maybe can't investigate. Just remember, if you do go poking around, don't do it at night. If you do, the night is likely to do more than poke back at you.
The Seething Dark, Gideon Farm Part 2. There are so many problems with the way the company's handling the cleanup. I wanted to say something directly these past few months, but I can tell that openly speaking up will draw the kind of attention that I don't want. Further, it will draw the kind of retaliation that I wouldn't survive if the stains on the wall in Eric's home were anything to go by. Poor Eric. He thought that doing the right thing was the same as doing the smart thing. I can't take the path he did, but I do want to get my information out there. It's risky to send anything digital, as I know the company tracks it, no matter what the device or the service used. Analog was the best choice I had. I drove out to a friend's home out in the wilder parts of Arkansas. It used to be a lodge of some sort that his uncle owned. He's long dead now, and the place is empty most of the year. It was the perfect spot for me. I brought an old typewriter that I'd picked up from a pawn shop on the way. It was heavier than I would have thought, but it was in decent enough condition. Well, the key hammers drop heavy, and the weight seems to echo what I want to write. So, here we go. I'm alone now with my guilt and fears in this lonely place. I won't give my own name, nor other certain details. However, I will write down the truth of things I was never supposed to know. If you found this document, do what you can to share it. I know many will not believe it, and more will just pass it off as an interesting story to listen to. I don't care. Just pass it along. At some point, maybe in a month or years later, people will come to know that this truth is far worse than any fiction. I work for a company that deals in various avenues for experimental research. Giving the name won't matter. They change hands and titles nearly every week to keep any form of investigations dead at the start. I know like it sounds, well, like it would be a massive undertaking, nearly impossible to handle such a task. Yet they have the resources and talent to make it happen like clockwork. Even if I were to give the current name I work for, well, it would only expose me to them. They don't share everything with employees by design. Normally, someone like me would get a fourth of the truth. However, through some cruel fortune of error, I was handed more than was allowed. Generally, I'm provided a single report to work on. My job was to review the details of the document and track down the information provided within. And the goal was always the same. Whoever the client was, they wanted the information to either disappear or be flipped around to make them less incriminating. I was a spin doctor of a sort, you could say, but it was more than that. In my past, I'd worked as a detective and a private eye. I had the skills to do the legwork and the stomach to do what they wanted. I was never asked to kill anyone, yet the rest still left me with enough material to work in a church confessional. Sometimes I'd have to talk to a reporter or witness and persuade them to change their stories. Other times I would break in and steal or burn anything that the client wanted erased. I always made sure never to kill anyone. Well, I was no saint, I know that, but I had rules, just enough to keep one foot out of hell. Nobody died from my work, or so I thought. You see, one of my last cases was delivered at the tail end of June. It came to me as all the others did, in a thick brown envelope on my kitchen table. It had a small number 3 on it that was pressed into the front like a wax seal, always a number 3. The method of delivery was always the same. It just appeared there with no warning or notice. It was something they told me to get over when I asked about it. For the number of dollars they were throwing at me, I had little issue with doing that. I'd always thought it was a matter of intimidation as well. If they could get that envelope in my house without me knowing, then what else could they do? It remains a sinking thought in the back of my mind, a thought that's been worming down into my gut more and more these past few hours. I've been nothing if not successful in the job. For the most part, things have always gone smoothly. Well, there was the one time where a housekeeper almost came in on me in the process of stealing a hard drive. It was close, but she ended up taking just enough time trying to unlock the door to save me from having to subdue her. However, that success streak ended with the delivery of a certain case file. I looked over the details of the case left on my table, as I always did. Nothing about it seemed out of the norm for me. I was to head to Louisiana and recover any items of interest from a burned-out farm, Gideon Farm to be exact. The items of interest were listed as family pictures, mainly of the children. I was also to ensure that I did not speak to anyone I found there. The directions stated that even if I was approached directly, to not under any circumstances speak at all until I had left the farmland at least 10 miles out. Well, I thought that detail was odd, but considering the secretive nature of my work, I just left it alone. I'd travelled to Louisiana before and was more or less familiar with the state. As I made my way down there, there was a strangeness to the air. The closer I got to my destination, the more unnerving the feeling became. It was like I was driving 80 miles an hour right into my grave and just kept going. Well, that's a dramatic statement, I know. It's just the best way I can describe it. As soon as I was around 30 miles from my destination, the feeling took on a more tangible sense. The sky was notably darkening into an ever-swelling cascade of greys. Another 10 miles in, and the darkness was becoming palpable. Somehow it felt thick in the air. I tell you, I've never seen anything like it. I even checked my phone and noted that it was still midday, barely past 1:30. I took it as a sign a storm might be brewing, yet this was more than just heavy clouds. It actually looked like nightfall was fast approaching. The last 10 miles approached, and I could swear I smelled the burning embers of a fresh fire. I knew it couldn't be the same farm fire I was heading to, as that was almost a week past. I told myself it was a country area. It was common for people to have bonfires out in these parts. Still, I knew even then that it wasn't the case. Just another in a line of lies I'd tell myself to deal with things. I shook my head clear of it and kept driving. The roads at this point were a mix of strange curves and tight bends. It was almost as if the damn farm didn't want me to find it. At times I felt I was going by the same areas over and over. Other times I swore I could hear someone calling out for help, or maybe kids playing outside. At one point I swore I saw a gentleman standing by the side of the road. As I approached to ask for directions, I remembered my instructions to not engage with anyone near the farm. I decided to keep to myself and drove on past him. Getting closer to him, I saw it wasn't a man at all, but simply the remains of a charred tree. How could I have ever confused it for a man? I don't know. As I moved past it, I thought I heard a voice speaking out to me. For a moment, I even thought I saw the burned stump move a bit. I rolled my window back up and shook off the eeriness of it all. Eventually, I came to a point in the road where I could see a clearing ahead. In the distance past it, I saw what had to be the farmland. I drove as close as the road would allow and parked my car under a tree. The road seemed to end in an abrupt point. There were large cracks in it, and then it looked to break down into a dirt trail that led through the clearing. I thought about driving through it, but decided against it, as I didn't want to risk getting the car stuck in some mud hole that I couldn't see. The sky was still dark, and the air carried a thick heat about it. It was like I was always next to a fire. I took a backpack and a flashlight from the trunk as I prepared to walk the remainder of the way. For a moment my eyes crossed over the red case in the trunk as well. It had my flare gun for emergency use, but it also hid my revolver as well. I made it a point to never bring it with me on casework, as I didn't want to be forced to use it. 34 cases in, and never once did I pack it along, but this time something felt so incredibly wrong. I grabbed the revolver and the flare gun, placing both in my backpack. When I closed the trunk, I heard a low rumble roll against the sky. It would have been easy to place it as distant thunder, but the sound seemed to come up from the ground itself. I know that sounds completely odd, yet it's nothing compared to what I would see at the farm. I started my trek through the clearing towards my target. For the most part, my travel through the low grass was uneventful. Sometimes I thought I could hear footsteps behind me, or perhaps saw a glance of a person running alongside me just out of the corner of my eye. I stopped a few times to investigate, but nothing concrete was there. I took a deep breath and moved on, making sure to keep myself calm. That said, I did remove the revolver from my backpack and placed it into my back pocket. As much as I didn't want to admit it, the pervasive darkness and phantom sounds around me were eating at my nerves. It took me nearly half an hour to make my way through the clearing. And once I did, I found another dirt trail that led me to the farm. As I approached, there was a strange collection of signs posted around the path. They were fashioned from sticks, stones, rope, and in some cases what appeared to be charred bones. They bore strange writing on them that I could not make out. Even without being able to read them, they all still carried across a theme of grim warnings. I got near to one to inspect it, but almost as soon as I got close to it, the makeshift sign crumbled away into smouldering ashes, and a wave of fresh heat came off from it as it fell apart. My nerves were admittedly taxed at this point, but I could have sworn I heard a distant scream as it collapsed. I paused there for a moment, trying to collect my own thoughts. In my experience, people tend to fall apart quickly when they let their minds run away with all the details around them. Instead, I chose to focus on my objective, the farmhouse. Get in, look for family items, and get out. I can't say I didn't have my own ideas of what happened here, and why they wanted these items. Sure, it could be that they were of sentimental value, but I highly doubted it. So many factors in this case were screaming out at me to turn back, and instead I pushed all of that aside and moved on towards the ruined shell of what was once the farmhouse. Along the path I came across an abandoned truck. It looked like it had been there for years. It wasn't so much burned as it was simply covered in ash and grime. I could make out some form of logo on the side. From what I could gather, it belonged to a security company. Moving past it, I came to the farmhouse itself. It looked like it had been ravaged by flames, but something about the way it stood did not seem to fit. There were signs that the house almost seemed to implode inward in some parts, yet outward at others. And there was this slick, almost oily black substance that dripped from some of the charred areas. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that somehow there were small sections of the house that seemed entirely untouched by the fire inside. I couldn't understand it, as it looked like the fire had spread quite thoroughly from the inside of the home and over to the barn on the southern side. A blackened trail extending from the farmhouse said as much. I shone my flashlight into the ruins of the house, trying to be sure not to slip on any of the oil-like secretions that seemed to be all around the place the more I looked. As I made my way through the debris, I heard more phantom footsteps here and there. Again, I rallied my thoughts to keep my mind steady. Small bits of burned wood crunched under my path. Sometimes I get a very wet sucking sound as I stepped into one of the black puddles. The stuff was thick and viscous. I spent the better part of an hour looking around the house remains. It was slow and tedious as I attempted to keep my footing solid while invading this old place. The best I could find was a single book of drawings, something that I thought one of the kids may have had. It was stuck inside one of those untouched areas. Some of that black substance was stuck around it. After a bit of cleaning, I stuck it inside an evidence bag and placed it in the backpack. Finding no way to access the remains of the upper area of the home ruins, I decided to check the only other building standing on the property, the southern barn. I found more and more of those strangely fashioned signs on the way. Nearly all of them were covered in the same inky stuff from the house. I tried to touch 3 more of them, and each time they fell apart as the one before. An aspect that remained the same was also the distant scream I heard each time. It was like these things were dying in some form. Eventually I found myself in front of the barn. It was as normal a barn as any other you might have seen. Nothing remarkable about its design or size. And yet, even so, standing in front of the great doors felt like I was at the gates of hell itself. Again, more and more of my sensible side was tearing at me to pull away. Just go home, forget about all of this. As those thoughts rolled around my head, I felt the rusted texture of the door handle in my hand. I didn't remember reaching for it, but there it was. I stopped and recollected myself yet again as I pulled the doors open. The immediate rush of decrepit, fetid stink mixed with the rolling heat forced me to take a few steps back, nearly vomiting. I'd smelled the decay of death before in my work, but this was something foul on another level. I pulled out a handkerchief from my backpack and used it as a makeshift mask. As I moved closer to the door, I shone my light around the floor and saw more of that black substance coating the floor. I pulled my gun and held it at the ready. I walked through the doorway, slowly guiding my way with both the flashlight and gun. More of that same dark substance was on the ground. As I looked around, I noticed it was everywhere, on all surfaces, at all angles, in each little spot. I was quite hesitant to venture further into that slick, glimmering hell. However, my light caught something in the far left of the building, something that wasn't covered entirely in the darkness. I took a few steps forward and saw it was a person laying on the ground. They wore some form of protective suit, something you'd see during an outbreak or maybe for a highly radiated area. It was a stark blue against the void of black around it. I shouted out to the person, asking if they were okay. Somehow I knew they were long dead, even as the words came out. I approached the body carefully, knowing that whatever might have happened could very well befall me as well. I rolled the body over and saw that the protective visor also concealed the face. However, in the person's hand was a satchel that had an odd symbol on the latch. A creak and groan of the structure brought my attention back behind me. I was becoming more and more sure of someone or something close by. With the satchel being the only thing of notable interest, I grabbed and threw it over my shoulder. Some of that black residue slimed its way down my arm as I did, and the smell of it was sweetly rotten. It was horrible. I made my way out of the barn and tried to shut the doors again. I don't know why. Maybe it was just something to make me feel better, as if knowing this place was closed off was better for me, or everything in general. And yet, tried as I might, the doors would not properly shut. I shone my flashlight down and saw that some of that substance had hardened on the hinge and made it impossible to move it further. I tried to hit it with the butt of the gun, but it was no use. The stuff was like solid steel now. Defeated in my attempt, I simply backed away and began to make my way to the car. I was done with the farm and wanted little else to do with it. I had never felt so repulsed by something in my life, not just in the sense of smell or anxiety of the darkness there. It was so fully against me, like I shouldn't have been there, or, more directly, I couldn't have been there. Those were not grounds man was meant to walk on. I started with a brisk walk to the clearing, but nearly at once I began to run. That sense of being watched was now directly a feeling of being hunted. I made it halfway through the clearing and turned around with my gun aimed straight ahead. I was sure I'd find some methed-out psycho or wild animal behind me. Something, anything. But it was just the same heated darkness that was always there. Alone. With me. This both calmed and unnerved me. I was glad to be alone, but in my gut I knew I was not. I kept a brisk pace back to the car, jogging at times or a full-on run at others. As I saw the familiar silhouette of my car, my heart began to feel elation. I was there. I was almost out. How wrong I was. I didn't bother with the truck. I moved right to the driver's side just to get in as quickly as possible. Yet as I pulled on the door, it wouldn't move. I mean, the key fit, it turned just fine. The handle was working, but the door would not budge. I looked for any possible reason and even tried the passenger side. I tried the trunk and found the same issue. Then, with a horrible thought, I turned the flashlight to the road under the car. There in the hot dark was the same black substance from the farmland. It was poured under the car like an oil leak. However, it wasn't just sitting under the car. It was reaching up towards and into the car itself. Tiny tendrils of its substance were wrapped into the vehicle. As I looked up, I could see it spreading throughout the interior of the car itself, snaking and winding a path from the air-conditioned vents to the steering wheel and then the door itself. Then it threw strings of itself into the window. More and more until it became a thick, oozing mass about the size of an arm. As I stared into it with the light, it shuddered and pulsed in odd intervals. Suddenly, with a violent twitch, it broke apart in the middle and formed a milky black orb. I looked on with equal parts of horror and curiosity as it formed something around the sides of the orb. With a fluid and slimy effect, the sides of the orb closed in on itself and then opened again. The thought of what it was didn't hit me right away. And then, with shaking hands, I realized what I'd seen. This thing, this crawling, oily nothing from the farm, it had just blinked. I was being watched. This thing made an eye and was now watching me. I began to back away as I noticed more and more of the same milky black orbs blinking around other parts of the car. This stuff, whatever it was, it had intent. It wasn't just growing and expanding. It was moving, exploring, touching, and knowing. There's a strange terror that comes from realizing something is sentient. It's an old fear that comes up through your genes, the fear of a predator maybe, knowing that something is capable of directed thought, then knowing that that thought process may be aimed at you. I overcame the fear, if only for the moment, and began to run down the road. I can't say how long it was, but after some time I remember hearing the sound of glass shattering. It was followed by a screeching tear of metal that seemed to go on forever. Inside that noise I again heard something else, screaming or loud speaking, I can't fathom which. All I know is I did not want to turn around to know anything else about it. I ran and ran as hard as I could. My legs began to liquefy and painful fire ran along my every breath. I could not tell if I was getting anywhere, as the pervasive darkness was seemingly getting worse. I stuck to the road as best as possible, yet at some point I ended up in a grassy area. However, in the distance I could see something. A light. With an ever-encroaching smell of rotten heat behind me, I forced myself to at least push on to that light. With my body nearly spent and a breath that I could not hope to catch, I made my way to the light source. It was a camp trailer hitched to an old truck. I tried so hard to call out for help, to ask for assistance, for anything, but my words were lost to exhaustion. My legs quivered and shut down on me, mere feet from the trailer. Just as I was about to give in and let the dark take me, I saw the door open. A woman stepped out, dressed in the same protective suit as the person I'd found in the barn. However, she didn't have the head covering attached, allowing me to see her face. I never got her name. She was slender, short black hair, tan skin, maybe brown eyes. I can't remember. I know she helped me into the trailer. I heard her struggling with me as she tried to get me standing. At some point we got inside. She was frantically working the door, trying to get it to lock and shut properly. I must have blacked out for just a moment or two. Parts of the ordeal are missing to me. Once I got my senses back, I poured out some water from my backpack. She looked at it with such a longing face. It was clear that she wanted some. I shared another bottle I had, along with an energy bar. She thanked me and advised me that she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. As you can imagine, I had a bevy of questions for her. Who was she? What was she doing here? What was that stuff outside? After she'd devoured the last of the power bar, she got quiet and calm. She sat up straight and looked me square in the eye. She said she would tell me that she was here to handle cleaning duty for a client, but she could tell me nothing else. The way she said it was not a tone of authority, but rather one of servitude. She couldn't tell me because she was not allowed to, but also because she was afraid to as well. Well, I wanted to press further, but she held a finger to her mouth to silence me. Quiet now, she said. I abided, more out of confusion than submission. She pointed to the roof and a single window of the camper. Something was crawling on top of it. It sounded like it had weight to it. After a moment, the heavy thuds on the roof went away. We waited in silence for a few moments before speaking. She looked at me and said that the job her team had come to do had gone sideways. She noted that from my clothing I wasn't prepared for what was here, so I either didn't know or I shouldn't know. I told her that I was hired to retrieve items from the farm site, nothing more. I explained what I'd seen there, the substance that had chased me, the signs and the noises. I also told her about the body I'd found in the barn. She seemed visibly upset by this, but held whatever emotion was there in check. She asked if I'd seen anyone else, and I replied I hadn't, to which she seemed angered. I was waiting for a relief team, she told me. I guess they're not coming or already failed, she added. I inquired about the trailer she was in. She told me her team was attacked by something. When it happened, they'd run back towards their van, but it was missing. Some people died right in front of her from something she couldn't see. Others just went silent and disappeared. She said that she'd run through the house and grab the keys to the truck outside. She drove it until she ran out of gas and then hid in the trailer. She said the battery might go out at any point. She'd been running it for a day already. At this point, I was starting to clear up and understand that what she was saying didn't make sense. I told her I didn't pass a truck on the way here. She said she was there for over a day already, and I would have passed her. She smiled then and looked away. Nothing here works right, mister, she said, throwing down her empty water bottle. When we got here, it was already morning, yet the sky was as dark as night, she said. Well, I know that when I drove, I hit that pedal and was on the road for hours, she said, closing her eyes. She seemed so distraught at that statement. Yet when I look outside, hearing the noise, and I see you... She trailed off, barely pushing back a stream of tears. I asked her what was wrong, what had happened. She cleared her eyes and said that she'd seen it. I asked again for clarity. What did she see? I saw the farmhouse, the barn, the black sky reaching out for me, she said. Hours. I drove for hours. How can it still be there? She asked, with new tears welling up. This place, this farm, it's not just that. The whole place is, well, it's awake and hungry. She said with a shiver on those last few words. This stuff, it watches me, you, all of us from inside the barn, she added. I inquired what she'd meant by that last part. What do you mean it watches from the barn? I asked. She said she'd seen it for a moment. It wasn't really in the barn, more or less it was in the ground all over the place. She said it talked to her for a moment, and then a bit more since she'd been in the trailer. She said the thing wanted her to come back. She began to ramble a bit at this point, and after a few minutes she just went quiet. She reminded me of a woman who'd been beaten by her husband from an old case I'd worked back when I was still an honest man. She would talk about the things he wanted from her, and why he was great, or maybe the stress he was under. Anything but the black eyes and broken bones he'd given her. After a bit of defending him, her mind, or maybe her heart, would just shut down and she'd just sit there staring into a wall, mumbling nonsense. It was like she just ran out of enough sport for her own lies. She went numb and cold. And this woman in the trailer seemed to be doing the same thing. However, her issue seemed to be that she ran out of sanity for the time being. I could relate. My own mind was still reeling from what I'd seen and heard. I tried to talk to her again over the course of the following hour. Yet she seemed to fall asleep from the looks of it. It was the first time she'd done so in a while. I tried my best to concoct a plan of action, come up with some rational ideas, but I couldn't seem to think straight. She was right. Something about this place, it's wrong. The sky, the time, the smells, all of it wrong. It seemed to be getting worse by the moment as well. I checked my phone and saw that the date was now nearly 1 month ahead of when I'd first arrived. Well, I knew that was impossible, and it had to be. Yet again, was what I saw possible. Unable to sleep and needing to work my mind into something stable, I decided to go through the contents of the satchel that I'd picked up in the barn. Opening it, I found 3 items inside. A simple knife, nothing remarkable about it. Next was a picture of some sort of lettering. It was loosely matched to some old markings I'd found on the crumbling signs around the farm. Last was something I was surprised to find. A thick brown envelope. It was just like the ones I would receive my cases in. Although where mine had a stamped number 3, this one had a number 5 on it. I was taken aback, of course. And these people, this woman next to me, seemingly all work for the same people. My people. I looked over to the woman. She was still sleeping, deeply at that. I decided to open the envelope and look for myself. Inside there were 2 separate papers. One had directions to the farm with instructions to destroy everything once they collected the needed samples. It also noted that if the fire was not working, then they should simply employ the 2nd and 3rd level cleans as needed. No mention of what those were, but I suspect some form of explosive or corrosive compounds might have been in use. The second paper now, that one was a shock to read through. You see, in that paper the team seemed to have a secondary objective. It was to kill and destroy any evidence of a level 3 investigation they found. The paper noted my name right next to a picture of me. It said I'd been AWOL for over 2 months, and I was suspected of being indoctrinated by something called Halawa Rin. Reading further, it stated confirmation that I'd already killed the 2 members of the level 4 recon team, and one from another level 5 team. It said the other members of that team were unaccounted for. However, it cites streamed video evidence as proof of my actions. Well, I couldn't believe what I was reading. That stuff, that thing on the farm. I know that in itself it's something crazy, yet even so, this report, the mention of my supposed murders, the time difference, all of it. I couldn't handle it. It seemed to be the final kick to my own mental support. I lost it for a moment. I don't know why, but I screamed into the paper, into my hands. I felt disconnected from myself at the time. I stood up, jabbering about the inconsistency, the sheer lunacy of all this. The woman then woke up, looking at me with wide eyes. I moved right over to her and asked, "Which team are you with? The recon or the cleanup?" She looked shocked, but I asked her again in a much firmer tone. I must have looked absolutely insane to her, thinking back on it. She stammered something, and it fueled my lunatic anger at that moment. I asked again, with a spitting rage. "The recon. I'm with the recon," she finally stuttered out. I asked her about the letter I'd found, the instructions to deal with me. She said she knew nothing about it. She'd never even known there was a group called the Cleaners. Nor did she know who I was, adding that if she did, she wouldn't have tried to help me when she'd seen me. She also noted that she didn't know about another recon team that had been sent. I stood there in wild thought, trying to process any of what I'd learned. Of course, I considered right away that she was lying, but even some of that didn't make sense. The weight of confusion and sheer exhaustion had crumbled my once stoic mental fortitude. I came to realize that the woman was now still sitting where she lay, but also now holding a knife. The look on her face was obvious in her silent questions. "No, I did not kill anyone," I said frankly. Yet she still maintained her grip on the knife and motioned it towards the door. She wanted me gone, out of the trailer. Well, I knew the feeling. She couldn't trust me in this infuriating, heated darkness any more than I could her. Without any further dialogue, I backed out of the trailer, keen to keep my eyes on her as I did. Once outside, I heard her lock the door, and seconds later she began to sob again. I wanted to feel more than pity for her, but a guttural echo sounded out across the dark. It was hard to see anything, but I did find the paved road again. My backpack and light were still in the trailer. I began to wander through the dark, the thick heat of the area crashing into me like waves, some stronger than others. At times I stumbled as they came over me, nearly knocking me to the ground. I felt that if I were to fall, the weight of the heat and dark would overtake me. I can't describe the length of road I travelled or for how long. I'd completely divorced myself from the idea of time at this point. After some while I saw a break in the dark. The road appeared clearer, even straighter. The heat dripped away little by little, but never totally left. Still, it was a slight bit more endurable. Then a glint of slivered light shone in the distance. Small at first, but quickly increasing in scale. As it neared, I realized what it was. My mind understood what the eyes had seen, yet, as with so much in that place, it could not be. It was my car with me in it, driving through the early day sunshine. It was me on my way to the farm. I tried to scream, jump up and down, cry out, even wave my arms. The car for a moment seemed to slow down. The windows were down. I could see me. The me in the car looked puzzled for a few brief seconds before driving away, driving down towards the farm. I was furious at the fool in the car. I began to yell profane and horrible things. As I did, an itch started on my leg, and then moved up to my back. I looked down at myself and saw a trail of soot or ash seemingly crawling upwards from my leg. I frantically shook it off and ran further down the road. The thing is, the further and further I ran, the more pointless it was. You see, much like the woman in the trailer, I'd never bothered to look back again. Not really. At some point I thought to myself the car might come back and decided to turn and see. And when I did, I saw it. The farm. The clearing. It was all right there. It was like I'd never run at all. My car was missing. Only some odd markings and stains remained on the road where it once was. I looked for the trailer and the woman as well for a moment. I never saw either one ever again. I decided to make my way back to the farm. I was tired and done. Mind you, I was still afraid. It's just that at some point when your mind falters, that fear falls to background noise, something like a dull headache. You know it hurts, you know it's there, but you move along anyways if you can. Well, this was me moving because I could. I was moving because I didn't know what else to do. My approach through the clearing was much the same as before. However, this time I could see other people running through the farm ahead of me. All of them had a visible smear to them, as if I was watching an oil painting in motion. Some dressed in the same protective gear, others in simple plain clothes. I even saw 2 dressed in what seemed like high-end military gear with weapons at the ready. Some of these people passed me but never seemed to know I was there. As I neared the farm itself, I could see something happening around the back of the house. There was a man, or what could have been a man, soaring through the night sky. It looked like he was thrown from something, or by something. I saw a small child run behind me and disappear into the clearing. Something else came after him, something monstrous and opaque. I couldn't properly see what it was, but it was nothing close to human. In the direction of the burned-out barn, I saw a haze of smoke and eerie lights. Pushing forward, I noticed the structure was no longer burned down, but standing, albeit with some odd, pulsing growths covering it. There was some kind of commotion going on inside, but I couldn't make it out. My attention turned behind me, as one of the more militantly geared phantoms ran into me. For a moment, I thought he'd seen me, and looked like he wanted to say something. I was relieved to have someone else with me. However, that was a short-lived thought, as he drew his weapon on me. I ran around the side of the house for cover, sure he was going to drop me, yet it never happened. I watched as he just stood there frozen, and then seemed to drip upwards into the sky. Watching his form liquefy into the stars, I saw something else. On top of the old barn where I'd found the other envelope, something sat watching it all. A mass of blackened grease and other fetid, rotting components. Not so much a form, more of a concept. It had what could be called slender arms and a bulbous head of some sort. I saw that it was filled with many of the same black glittering orbs that I'd seen in my car. Eyes. Eyes for everything. They rolled around, seemingly focusing and unfocusing on various events happening at the farm. More screams came from the land around me. I turned to see someone in the protective gear set running into the barn with the monstrous thing sitting atop. It turned a third of its eyes down into the structure and made some form of jerky movement. This was followed by a sound like roaring water and another, now muffled, scream. I stumbled backward, shocked at the sights. An intense fear was crawling its way back to the forefront of my mind, causing me to lose footing and crash against part of the house. As I did, nearly all of the thing's eyes turned to me. I could feel them. The force of his vision was tangible and terrible. It was as if it could reach out and feel you with its gaze. I fought the feeling and pulled away from the sensation of being drowned in its intense view. I needed to leave. I wanted anything that was not this. I had to get away. I looked for a way to hide, a way to disappear from that place. Then, as I turned to run, I saw the van. It was just sitting there running with the lights on. I made my way over and saw bloodstains over at the driver's side. Whomever the blood belonged to was gone. In a moment of flight taking over, I jumped into the driver's seat and started to drive. I didn't care if the damn road didn't take me anywhere. I was driving, running, escaping, even if just for the smallest of moments. I drove through the dark farmland and even through the clearing, caring little for any possible pitfalls it may have. I pushed and even willed the van to drive onwards. I crossed the clearing and made my way to the road. It was in an even worse condition now. Cracks and potholes littered it. It didn't matter. I drove on. At some point I even blew a tire, I think. The grinding noise may have been something else, but in the chaos of the flight, I cared little to check. The heat and darkness was still as oppressive as it ever had been, yet the feeling of that crawling set of eyes on my back was all I could think about. Even then, in the van, driving as fast as I could, that alien touch at my skin was tearing at the last shreds of sanity that I had. In a roar of sheer desperation, I closed my eyes and screamed out into the nightmare. I hurled profanities and curses as far out into the void as possible. I think I even remember laughing into the hot waves of pressure as the windshield buckled and cracked. I think I truly lost it there on that desolate piece of road. And yet, somehow, I prevailed. I opened my eyes and found myself laying amongst the bushes by the side of the road. Not a road or place I was familiar with. There was a cool wind on my back, and the fresh patter of rain was coming down around me. However, the most important detail was the sky was not a deeply darkened void. No, the sun was there. I was there. I don't know how or why I was able to leave that place, the farm. I don't even know what happened to the van. It took me some time to walk to a rest stop. And from there I found I was in the state of Colorado. I explained to a passing officer that I was attacked and left for dead. Well, I didn't know what else to say. I found out I'd been declared missing by friends of mine. I'd been gone for over a month. I had some odd issues to sort out and lies to tell, yet after a few days I was able to get back to my home a few states over. My house had been ransacked. When I tried to leave, I caught a car tailing me. I was able to lose it, but I was sure it was another cleaning crew or something of the like left behind just in case I'd come back. Pulled out all my available funds and dropped my credit cards. Took a trip to see my friend Eric. As I said at the start, he didn't seem to have made it. I found evidence that he was trying to look for me. We worked for the same employer. He was privy to my cases and knew where I went. It seemed he also tried to find out something else about the accursed farmland and make it public. Something that the people up top wanted to be buried. So it seems they did just that with poor Eric. There is something wrong at that place. I don't think you can even properly reach it unless you find the right opening. And yet, it's still there. I know it is. I can still feel that sickening sense of touch from time to time. Like that monster's gaze is still there, on top of that barn, just gazing out into the world. I don't know where this will go, but I do plan on investigating further. I came across another story of something happening in New Orleans Research Hospital. A patient by the name of Aaron Nelms was mentioned in an internal email by a now-dead researcher at the facility. It was part of Eric's notes. The details mention something living in the walls, something watching them all. It's a derelict path at best, but I can't stay in this cabin forever. Perhaps this Aaron Nelms could have some answers. One way or another, I'm going to see what they're doing. Maybe I can help someone, maybe just myself. Either way, I'm stepping back into that dark. I'll drop this document with directions to copy and circulate. Perhaps you'll hear it, perhaps you won't. I just hope that, if you do, you stay away from Gideon Farm. Nothing good grows there anymore. So that's a story I started, more than a year and a half ago. Long time ago. And to be honest, I really recently realised that there was a part 2 to it. And I wasn't entirely satisfied with the way that I'd edited and mixed the first video, so this seemed like the perfect opportunity to round off the story and make sure that the first part was as good as I wanted it to be. So, there you go. What did you think? Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video. And as always, I will join in the chat. So, that's it for Monday. Oh, it's May already. Can you believe it? Where is the time going? I'll be back on Wednesday here, then on Thursday, next episode of the podcast, which is becoming ever more popular, thanks to your wonderful support. And I'll be here again on Friday, so another busy week for me. But that's enough for one evening, isn't it? Surely it is. So until next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.